Good morning. Thank you for joining us for this service and Dharma talk, which are being recorded for the Pasadena Buddhist Temple for Sunday, March 28th of 2021. Whenever you may be viewing this, thank you for joining us.
Hi, my name is Ace and I'll be reading you a short story. When you eat a meal, you are grateful for your food. Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? Meat and fish used to be living before. They ended up on your plate. Even fruit and vegetables were all alive at one point. Because they were alive, they grew up nice and big. You need to eat every day in order to grow up. When you eat, you're receiving life from your food. Not only you, but all creatures on this planet depend on each other on their life. There is nothing more important than life. It's important to remember that you only have one chance in this life.
We will be chanting the Juseige. Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Butsu, Namo Butsu, Namo Butsu, Namo Butsu. Busatsu, Daimuryo, Jukyo, Juseige, Gagon Sho, Thegan, Hishimu, Jodo, Shigan Hu Mandoku, Theifudyo Shogaku, Gao Muryo Ko, Uidai Theishu, Futhai Sho Bingu, Theifudyo Shogaku, Gashijo Butendo, Myosho Tyo Jippo, Kukyo Mi Shomon, Teihujo Shogaku, Ryokujin Shonen, Joe Shu Bongyo, Shigumu Jodo, Isho Tenin Shi, Jinriki and Daiko, Fushomu Daido, Shoujo San Kumyo, Kosai Shu Yakunan, Kaihichi Eigen, Meshi Kon Moan, Hei Sokusho Akudo, Tsudatten Shumon, Kosojo Mandoku, Iyoro Jippo, Nichigatten Shu Juki, Tenko Onhugen, Ishu Kai Hodo, Koseku Dokuho, Jo Dai Shuchu, Seppo Shi Shiku, Kuyo Ithaya Button, Gu Sokushu Tokuhon, Ganne Shtenjoman, Tokui Sangayo, Nyobutn Mu Gechi, Tsudatten Mi Husho, Gangaku Eriki, Toshi Sai Shoson, Shiganya Koka, Daisen no Kando, Koku Sho Tenin, Tochin Myoke. Namandabu, 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 Namandabu. Gani Shikudoku, Jodo Shinshu Don Monai Shin Onyo On La Koku. Namanda Burmanda Namanda 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 Burmanda Namo Amida Butsu Namanda Butsu Namo Amida Butsu Namanda Butsu Namanda Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. We rely upon the source of limitless wisdom and endless life. Namo Amida Butsu. 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 Again, good morning, and thank you for joining us for this service, which is being prepared for this coming Sunday, March 28th of 2021. Please allow me to begin with a moment of silence for the victims of the shootings in Atlanta, Georgia, in Boulder, Colorado, in Burma. Namo Amida Butsu. 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 Now, I have the privilege of being the resident minister of the Pasadena Buddhist Temple, the Juseige. And I am in my 7th year here. I am well compensated. I'm very happy here. I enjoy my work here very much. And I want to speak this morning about the matter of being privileged and the matter of being victims of prejudice and the need to speak out, our need to speak out against racism, against bigotry. You should not have to feel privileged to walk down the street safely. You should not feel privileged. You should not need to feel privileged for what you have earned. When I was studying for the ministry 35 years ago, back at Institute of Buddhist Studies, one of my fellow students came to me one day and said, you know, you're really lucky because the assistant dean likes you, but he doesn't like Reverend Rosenthal because he spent a lot of time doing Zen. You did Zen too. You're lucky. And I said to her, no, I'm not lucky. I'm a good student. I read the books. I turn my papers in on time. I do the work. I don't know that the assistant dean is prejudiced against Reverend Rosenthal, but my being treated well is because I'm doing my work here. It's not a privilege. I got angry with her about that. And I don't know, Reverend Rosenthal never complained to me about being treated badly by anyone at IBS. This was her perception, that I was being treated better than the other student. It's not a privilege when you earn it. It's not a privilege to be able to walk down the streets safely. We should not need to feel privileged to walk down the street safely without being insulted or attacked. Currently, you cannot walk down the street in most American cities and feel confident that you will not be insulted or attacked if you are Asian American, Pacific Islander, or Black, or in many parts of the country if you're Hispanic. This is wrong. This racism is wrong. Our Board of Trustees here at the Pasadena Buddhist Temple decided some months back to put up a Black Lives Matter banner and also a flag honoring LGBTQ folks. LGBTQ support flag and a Black Lives Matter banner. People should not feel afraid to walk down the street because they're African American. People should not have to feel afraid to walk down the street because they are Japanese American. The increasing prejudice against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders can be directly traced to the words of the past president, Donald Trump. In my humble opinion, he was not the worst president we've ever had. He almost never sent our servicemen and servicewomen into harm's way without good reason. So he's not the worst president we ever had. I'd rank him about 30th out of 46. But Donald J. Trump was the worst friend Japanese Americans have had in the office of the President of the United States in 75 years. He's been the worst friend to Asian Americans in 75 years. So we're trying to dig our way out of this problem, this increased atmosphere of racism, prejudice, judgment. Our current American president, Joe Biden, has addressed the distressing increase in hate crimes against Asian Americans. President Biden said on March 11th, "Vicious hate crimes against Asian Americans who have been attacked, harassed, blamed, and scapegoated. At this moment, so many of them are fellow Americans. They're on the front lines of this pandemic, trying to save lives. And still, they're forced to live in fear for their lives, just walking down the streets of America. It is wrong. It is un-American. And it must stop." Words about hate crimes against Asian Americans from our current president, Joe Biden. The president of our nation says discrimination and bigotry are wrong and must not be tolerated. The founder of our religious tradition, Shakyamuni Buddha, spoke out against prejudice hundreds of times in hundreds of places. For example, saying in the Dhammapada, "A person is not noble because of who his parents are. A person is not noble because of which village they were born in. A person is not noble because of the color of their skin. A person is noble when their actions are noble." Thus spoke the Buddha. Now, Buddhism comes in many varieties, and about half of those varieties are still extant and represented in the existing 200 or so schools of Buddhism. The founder of our specific school, Jodo Shinshu, the Hongan-ji-ha school of the Jodo Shinshu stream of Pure Land Mahayana Buddhism, our founder, Shinran, has written. This is Chapter 1, Article 1 of the Tani Sho. "We should know that the original and fundamental vow of the Buddha does not distinguish between those who are young and old, does not distinguish between those who are good and evil. It is faith alone, trusting confidence in the vow of the Buddha alone is of supreme importance. For it is the purpose of the Buddha's vow to save us, sentient beings, all sentient beings, burdened as we are with the most powerful of lusts, torn by great evils as we are. To believe in the vow of the Buddha, therefore, neither do we need any other good, because there is no good superior to the Nembutsu, nor do we need to be afraid of any evil, for there is no evil capable of obstructing the original promise of the Buddha." Thus spoke Shinran. Again, reading that first sentence. It's actually the middle of the article, but where I started. We should know that the original vow of the Buddha does not distinguish between those who are young and old, between those who are good or evil. The Buddha's compassionate influence flows into all lives, the lives of all living beings, good, bad, or indifferent. The Buddha's vow to liberate all suffering and deluded beings does not distinguish between the good and the bad, the young and the old. We humans should not discriminate more or less worthy, better and less. But we must distinguish between the young and the old. Old guys like me get the COVID-19 vaccine first. There's a reason for that. That's not ageist discrimination. It's triage. It's rational decision-making. Now, in Japanese language, there is the term sabetsu, which means to discriminate, and the term kabetsu, which means to make distinctions. Again, sabetsu is to discriminate as better or less, inferior or superior, but kabetsu is just to distinguish what is there. For example, older guys are really older, and we're really more vulnerable to respiratory illnesses than younger guys. 27 years ago, when I started professional ministry at Nishi Betsuin, the acting Rinban, I was working with 3 Japan-born ministers. They had, back then we had 4 ministers there, and 3 Japanese ministers, 3 Japan-born ministers, and myself. And the acting Rinban said, we're not going to discriminate, we're just going to rotate the English and the Japanese sermon. So that meant that each of us gave an English sermon one week, and then a Japanese sermon the next week, and then an English sermon the next week. Well, that's what I was told to do, and I did that for about a month. And then my Japan-born colleagues complained it was too hard for them to prepare the English sermon every other week. And so it developed into the situation where at that temple I gave the English language sermon about 45 weeks out of the year, and I spoke in Japanese about 3 weeks out of the year. That makes sense. That's a distinction that can be made. It's not discriminatory. It ended up like that I gave the English sermon most of the time, and Japanese only occasionally, Japanese language talk only occasionally, because that was a reasonable arrangement based on the distinctions in the staff's abilities. It's not discriminatory. Just drawing a distinction is not to discriminate. Shaquille O'Neal really is big. Ben Stiller really is small. It's not discriminatory to notice that. Is big better than small? For a professional basketball player, yes, it is. For a movie comic, being big isn't better. In fact, if you think about some of his movies, Something About Mary, Night at the Museum, some of those little jokes wouldn't have worked if Ben Stiller was this big, imposing physical being like Shaquille O'Neal. Big isn't better than small. Small isn't worse than big. But they fit different situations differently. There is a distinction to be made there. However, Shinran is telling us, what Shinran is telling us about Amida and the compassionate influence of Amida Buddha's vow is not that he doesn't discriminate. It's that the Buddha doesn't make any distinction whatsoever between young and old, rich or poor, good and bad. We are being told that the Buddha does not distinguish, even in the slightest way, between good and bad, young and old. From the enlightened perspective, these distinctions have no real meaning. As human beings, if we ask ourselves, who is the better person, Mr. Rogers or Adolf Hitler, right? I mean, it's for most of us, Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers, you bet. However, Mr. Rogers didn't turn vegetarian until his mid-50s, whereas Adolf Hitler was vegetarian all of his adult life. So, from the perspective of a steer or a chicken, Hitler's not looking so bad. To a chicken or a steer, vegetarianism is a big issue. To the discriminating mind, though, anything can be an issue. Race, religion, disability, political orientation, sexual orientation. We can be discriminated against for any of these reasons once we let that discriminatory mind take over. Now, being an Irish American and 72 years old, I have not experienced much discrimination in my life. But I have a little bit, and I'm glad that I have, because otherwise you can't understand if you've never felt it yourself. Back in 1956, we moved to Fresno, California, my family and I had a great year, 56 to 57. There were a bunch of kids in the neighborhood, very nice kids. Jeff Maxey, wonderful person. I forgot the other Jeff's name. Skippy, Brian Harding. I had all these friends within a block and a half. And as life will have it, after 1 year, everybody except Brian moved out of the neighborhood, including my best friend, Jeff Maxey. So I'm suddenly, there's no kids in the neighborhood. Well, then they start gradually moving in. But the first one in, I wouldn't want to mention their name and embarrass them, but the Pozakoffs moved in across the street from us. And Greg Pozakoff, when there was a new kid that moved into the neighborhood, he would go down to their house and say, you know, the boy on the corner house with the palm tree, don't play with him because he's Catholic. And I found this out because I finally made a friend. I finally made a new friend after about like 4 or 5 years not having any friends in the neighborhood. I finally made a friend with a new kid across the street, and he told me, Mark Wall told me that Greg Pozakoff had come to him and told him, don't play with the boy across the street because he's Catholic. You can discriminate on the basis of anything. The discriminating mind will take as inferior whatever it wants to take as inferior. Was it wrong of the Pozakoffs to discriminate against me in the late 1950s because I was Catholic? Was it wrong? I don't know. It was hurtful to me, you know, but they actually believed that their religion was superior to my religion. So can I judge that they were wrong? I don't know. It was hurtful. We humans can't judge others. We never know enough to really judge. The Buddha won't judge others. We can't. The Buddha just tries to help everyone, every living thing. This is the vision we are being drawn into, just wishing to help every living thing. We don't judge others as evil, but we can judge others' actions, their actions as utterly wrong. Murder is wrong. Murdering someone because of their race or their profession or their religion is utterly wrong. There have been a lot of killings going on this month. In the human realm, I guess there always are. In the animal realm, there always are. There have been a lot of killings going on this month. People killed because they went shopping at a grocery store. People killed because there were non-Burmese and non-Buddhist. They were Muslim and non-Burmese. That's a reason to kill them, in some minds. People were killed because they were Asian American, because they were of Asian ethnicity. This is terrible, ugly stuff that should not happen, actions that should not be done. Hurtful, mean actions that we must speak out against. I don't mean to discriminate between murdered Burmese and murdered Caucasians and murdered Chinese Americans and murdered Korean Americans, but I can't read all the names. There are too many. Too many people have been murdered this week and last week. So I will, not to be discriminatory, but just to focus on the one horrific event, I will read the names that I have of those who were murdered in Atlanta, Georgia last week. Murdered just for being Asian American. Forgive me if I mispronounce some of these names. Hyunjung Grant, Suncha Kim, Sun Si Park, Yong A. Yu, Delana Ashley Yon, Dao Yo Feng, Zhao Jie Yan. Please hold positive thoughts for these victims. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. We rely upon the source of limitless wisdom and endless life. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. I'm so sorry that these lives have been lost. There will be funds that will be taken up for these families. Help them if you can. If you can afford to, look up, find the funds. Speak out against racial prejudice, whatever else you do. We can't all afford to help financially. Speak out against racial violence. Stop Asian hate. Here at the Pasadena Buddhist Temple, we put up that LGBTQ support flag and the Black Lives Matter banner a few months back. And now we need to go out and get a Stop Asian Hate banner. We must speak in defense of all Asian Americans. We must speak in defense of all who are the subjects of prejudice. We must speak out against all forms of hatred. Black lives matter. Japanese American lives matter. Asian American lives matter. Pacific Islander lives matter. We must speak up for ourselves and for our friends and our neighbors. We must stop the hatred. We must stop the hatred being directed toward Chinese Americans, Japanese Americans, Korean Americans. We, unenlightened human beings, must stop racism and bigotry, despite our being less than thoroughly awoken. We can and will turn this around. We must oppose racial hatred and bigotry. We must oppose bigotry. We will unravel the complex of causes and conditions that create racism and bigotry. We will help the victims. We will educate those who do the harm. We will change this ugly, current racist environment. We will one day be able to give help and encouragement to all living beings, like the Buddha does, without discrimination, without making the slightest distinction between one living thing and another. All life is valuable. All persons are important. Thank you for listening to this Dharma message, for participating in this service. I will, as usual, close the Dharma message portion of the service with Gassho, a posture of respect and peace, and say the Buddha's name a few times, realizing that our saying the Buddha's name is the Buddha calling to us, is life telling us, all will be well and all will be well, and every manner of thing will be well. Please join me in Nembutsu as you choose. We rely upon the source of limitless wisdom and endless life. Namo Amida Butsu. 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 Thank you very much.